All right, everybody. So, welcome in, welcome in. Nice to have you here. So, if you don't know us, my name is Momo, and I'm part of Avatar Origins. And so, today we've got a very special guest brought to us in collaboration with the moderators at the in this ATLA Discord, Randy. So, I'm Momo. I'm gonna give a tall Earthbender and Rico a chance to introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce our very special guest.
Ugh. Okay, well, as Momo said, I am the tall earthbender from Avatar Origins. We want to give a shout out to Avatar Discord for co-hosting this thing in collaboration with us. We greatly appreciate it. Branding, I gotta say, I'm not going to say it yet. I'm just going to hold it like this, and you probably get what I mean. But I was very excited when I read this book. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We would like to thank you for joining us on this podcast. We greatly appreciate it. You have no idea how much we love doing this with you. So thank you 100 times for that. And I think Rico has something to say.
Yeah, hello, Randy. Great to meet you. Congratulations on the Reckoning of Roku. I'm pretty much the only Canadian representing right now, so shout out. And from one Filipino to another, once again, salamat po. And yeah, let's get it on, man.
All
Yeah, thanks
right.
for having
All
me
right.
and inviting me to be part of the conversation, and thanks to the Discord for hosting it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Randy. So this is the great, the one, the only, the author, Randy Ribay. I wanted to make sure to do that. And hello and welcome to everybody who's joining us in the chat and whoever's joining us, remotely from YouTube. So Randy, can you tell us a little bit more just about yourself and like more about just the reckoning, you and the reckoning of Roku?
Yeah. So I came. This is a little bit also of the story of like how I got into the writing the series and everything too. Um, so I got into the series late, right? For years and years, people who knew me and knew my tastes were like, "You got to check out Avatar: The Last Airbender." And for whatever reason, I just like didn't for a long time because sometimes like things got to come to you in the right time, right?
Right.
And then in 2020, when pandemic was starting, we were all kind of stuck inside. It dropped on Netflix, and I was like, all right, this is a good time to jump into it now. And from the first episode, I was all in, and I started, in the days before Twitter was complete trash. I started, really long thread, like episode by episode, like talking about all my reactions to every episode, my insights and analysis. And yeah, so that was kind of like my introduction to it. And then fast forward years later, FCE, who had written the first four books and done a really wonderful job, decided that he was going to step back. And I guess somebody who works on the books was familiar with my writing already from some of the other stuff I had come out with. I had three books come out before Avatar, Reckoning of Roku. And then they also knew I was a fan of the series because of that Twitter thread I had done. And so
Okay.
they like reached out to me and they're like, "Would you like to write this?" And I was like, "Yes, let's do that. Yeah, that's great. It's like a dream project for me. Like there are very few franchises or IPs, intellectual properties that I love enough that I think I would like want to step in and write into that world. And this was definitely one of the few. And so yeah, so when they came to me with it, the first step was kind of pitching story concepts to them. And so I had, in my mind, first things I wanted to do was like put some Philippine culture into Avatar. From the moment I watched it, right, I was like, all right, you got this like world inspired by Asia. And as I watched the series for the first time, I was like waiting and waiting for like Filipinos to appear in some way, shape, or form. And then the closest we got was like the like Vietnamese, a little bit of Vietnamese culture with the swamp benders, and then no Filipinos. And so when they're like, "You're gonna write this," I'm like, "All right, there's gonna be the Philippines in here," essentially. And and I also wanted the story very much to be digging into Roku's, thinking about those first few moments of Roku's life, kind of like thinking about how this revelation that he is the Avatar would have impacted him, right? Because I write young adult fiction, and so that's kind of like the years of our lives. I think when we're a lot of times becoming the person we're going to be for the rest of our life. And so I was trying to get into his head and thinking about him at that moment in that series of flashbacks we get in the original series, right? That episode, the what is it called, the Fire Lord and the Avatar, right? You get that whole like kind of outline, the big beats of his story, and it's like, yeah, how does he go from this kind of like bro kind of kid first becoming Avatar, right, to kind of where we see him at the end of his life, and and ultimately the tragic ending. So it's like, how do we get there, right? What are the seeds that were planted early on that kind of led him down that road, right? And so I saw my job is not telling the entire story of Roku, but really telling the beginning of that story and planting those seeds so that you could see for yourself by the time you get through with these books that yes, it makes sense that he ended up where he was, or that Sozin ended up where he was. And you can kind of see the path being laid, but obviously I'm not telling the entire story of decades of his life. I'm just focusing on that beginning. I don't know if that answered your question, but
That was
Great question.
amazing. It was great. It's so nice to hear like basically how the prequel, how you went around writing the prequel. So one of my questions to you, and it's kind of like flows in really well to this. So we had a fan question from Chocolate Soup. So how much the control of the story was in your hands when you were collaborating with people, even like Mike and Brian? Were you able to dictate this plot largely, or was it kind of like a skeleton was handed to you and then you were told to fill in those gaps?
yeah, they gave me a lot of freedom. Um, Pretty much like the only thing they gave me was Roku as a young adult, right? As a teenager. And so from there, it was, like I said, I like came up with a couple story pitches, then met with them and kind of talked through it. They gave me feedback and they kind of steered the direction. And then from there, after I had the concept that we settled on, I fleshed it out with an outline and then sent that. I got feedback from them and then started drafting, got feedback on the draft, and then continued revisions from there, right? So they were there every step of the way, but very much they were giving me the freedom, the creative freedom to go where the story goes, and or to take the story where I wanted the story to go, with kind of like one of the overarching, guardrails being what we already know about Roku's story. But because I was really focusing on him on those teenage years, it gave me the space, I think, to play within that a little bit and to play, as I wrote the story, to play with foreshadowing and what you as the audience know that Roku doesn't know or Sozin doesn't know yet. And I think that's kind of fun from an authorly perspective. But kind of knowing that I was writing about Roku in the teen years, when you get his story, when you get the highlights of his story, it's kind of like, well, yeah, he was named Avatar at 16. And then he studied airbending for a few years. And then he went on and he studied waterbending, right? So you just get these like huge skips in time. So for me, it was very much looking at this very compressed time period. And then how do I play with that to, like I said, kind of plant the seeds for where his story would go eventually.
Awesome. Awesome. Tall Earthbender, you want to ask the next question?
Well, as Randy was talking, I was really thinking about, I can't imagine, Randy, the daunting task of being handed such a massive project. So, and I'm thinking you're going to say yes to this, but I'm curious to know, and I'm sure the audience is curious to know, as you're writing and doing your the storyboards and your rough drafts, you stop after you come up with an idea or a plot in certain chapters. Do you stop and say to yourself, I hope the audience likes this, or oh my God, the audience is going to kill me for this one, because a lot of times when it comes to huge fan bases like Star Wars, Ninja Turtles, etc., and these storylines have been going on for decades, a lot of artists are almost intimidated by the audience of their response. So do you kind of keep that in mind, or do you say, well, I'm sure it'll be fine?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that concern is there, and like wanting to, like knowing how much the world is loved, having loved it myself before I was the creator within the world. And I've also, I've been a part of fandoms that you get new installments, and sometimes they're really great, sometimes they're really disappointing. So like that is always present, and I think that is always there. But the only way that I know how to deal with it as a writer is to try to just not pay as much attention to that and think more just about the story. I really try to lose myself in the character, like get inside their minds as much as possible and let that guide the direction the story is in. So if I'm kind of thinking, where's the story going to go from here? I'm not asking myself, well, what will fans really like, right? Or what would make fans really angry, and trying to steer away from that. I'm thinking from this character's perspective, with where they are emotionally, with what they know, what they don't know, what would they choose to do next? What would they say next, right? And in such a way, the character is hopefully driving the story in as realistic a way as possible, rather than kind of feeling like the author is doing something for fan service or or just kind of as a writer, kind of as a way of trying to let the story be the story, and hope things will settle where they were. And with that in mind, also keeping in mind, I think the things about the original series that I really loved, and trying to bring that to this story, right, and try to keep those in mind too. So I'm trying to write a story. One of my goals was to write a story that gives you the feelings of like the original series, right, and that you have complex characters, you have a lot of fun action, right? You have a lot of lighthearted moments amidst a lot of deeper moments. You have these complex themes that the story is struggling with and exploring within the context of the lives of children, right? And so as much as I can, writing the story, staying true to character, but also keeping those things in mind and trying to write a story that captures those ideas.
Of course,
Amen
thank you.
to that. Amen to
Pretty
that.
cool.
Rico, what about you?
Well, you gotta already answer the question, because as I started reading the book, it really did feel like an extended, like an extended scene of Avatar and the Fire Lords, and I was just gonna ask you if you did get inspiration from that one episode specifically, right? Because the one episode did touch up a little bit about the relationship between Gyatso and Roku, and you've expanded it a lot more into it. And I was wondering what was the process of going into that sort of thing, especially when his relationship with Sozin, because now we're learning a lot more from the book about Sozin's backstory as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that was definitely like a starting point for me of kind of like these are the guardrails, or these are the major moments in Roku's life and Roku's development. And so starting there and then thinking about the time, again, like the time frame that I'm trying to capture, and then thinking about fleshing that out in such a way that plants the seeds for the future moments, right? And so I knew going into the story that I wanted a conflict and a plot that essentially kind of mirrors what happens later in Sozin and Roku's lives, right?
Mm.
So starting out with this premise of, hey, he's just moved from the Fire Nation to the Southern Air Temple. And the premise of the novel, if you haven't read it yet, is the initial premise is that Sozin reaches out and he's like, "Hey, Earth Kingdom is trying to steal this obscure island that nobody ever really knows about. Can you go over there and like kick them out so that the Fire Nation can keep it, right?" And so to me, it was very much like an expansion of like, what is Sozin dealing with at that moment emotionally, right? And for him, my big emotional arc for Roku and Sozin, my big emotional arc for Roku is that idea of shifting his identity from somebody who is a Fire National, right, who grew up in the bosom of privilege in the Fire Nation,
Mm.
best friends with the future Fire Lord, right? How does he shift that identity from that to serving the world as the Avatar, right? And so what will get him in that direction? So to me, coming up with the premise was very much a sense of like, how do I force him or nudge him in that direction, right? Here's a situation where he has to decide, does he want to help Sozin or not with this thing? When Sister Disha, who's his airbending master, is telling him not to do it.
But it
And
was
like,
also cool how you mentioned that it was his conflicting
hmm,
his duties as a Fire Nation rep to the savior, to the one to bring balance to the whole globe. And I found that really, really cool that you did that and that.
yeah, and then in addition to that layer of like his loyalty to the Fire Nation,
Yeah.
sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background, but in addition to the loyalty to the Fire Nation, you have the other layer of just simply his loyalty to his friendship with Sozin. That's complicating things.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, cool. Thanks, man.
So I've got a question in the chat, and I'm gonna try to word it in a way that like will just be a little bit more sensitive to folks in the audience who have not read the book. But there, and this is something that Avatar: The Last Airbender as a whole kind of does. Like, they told the line, this is a kids show, but with very strong adult elements and themes. And so we're seeing some similar themes throughout this book. Wanted to get your thoughts on taking something that's essentially like the story from a children's show and adding in those adult themes, like death and murder and things like that. Thoughts?
Yeah. So I think I had a little more leeway, like writing for it. Like, this is technically, the book is for a young adult audience, right? And so in the show, the original show was probably aimed at, I would say, like middle schooler kind of aged kids, right?
Mhm.
Maybe upper elementary, middle school aged kids. And so, kind of like in the same way that I feel like Korra gets a little darker and takes on a little bit more serious content. Uh, in the same way, I think, like, if you read the Kyoshi novels or the Yang Chen novels, it does go a little bit darker and a little bit deeper as well. Um, I feel like Kyoshi, like, almost right away, it's got OCE sets the tone, right? And so, yeah, so it allows it, I think. Sorry, my dog is going crazy again. Yeah, so because of that, it gives me a little more space to kind of deal with a little bit more serious issues and serious topics like death and grief and all of that, which I think is also crucial to how, at least in my mind, how Roku develops, how Sozin develops. And you see something like, this is not too much of a spoiler, but you see Sozin take his first life, right? You see him, like, kill for the first time. And I was trying to show through that, like, what is kind of going on internally for him at that moment, because the Sozin that we know has wiped out an entire people group almost, right? Or he's kind of led the Fire Nation down that path. And so it is very much like, I can show you that first moment of his. It's kind of like that slippery slope, right? And you can see again later on as he kills again, not too much of a spoiler, kind of dancing around a little bit, kind of like how he's already started to accept that and embrace that as a tool of power, right? As a tool of control. And again, trying to, like I said, I keep coming back to this phrase, but I see a lot of what I'm doing in these early years with Roku, planting the seeds of where his story goes later, and for Sozin as well.
Okay, awesome. A tall earthbender. I want to pass the floor back to you. We're just gonna go round
okay.
and round.
Someone was asking, people were assuming that these are two different books. Do you mind explaining the difference? Because of the cover, they're assuming it's two different books. Do you mind explaining the difference between these two?
Yeah, so it's just quite simply the
Yeah.
one without the text is the special Comic-Con edition. So I think you can't buy it online. You can just buy it at San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con. And it's just meant to, like, have a nice cover so that you could potentially, like, use it as a poster, right? Because there's, like, no text on it. But the book itself is exactly the same. The only other, like, actual different one is the Barnes and Noble special edition. So they got 3 editions, right? The Barnes and Noble special edition includes, like, a deleted scene. Yeah, Rico's holding it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Indigo.
Okay.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I want to say, ever since we bear witness to this masterpiece, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, I've considered myself obviously a tall earthbender. I love earthbending. I love the earthbending community and everything. But because of how the story of the Fire Nation unfolded, I hated them. Well, hate is a strong word. I disliked the Fire Nation a long time, except for Uncle Iroh. Let's get that right off the bat. In the Legend of Korra, in Avatar: The Last Airbender, it always talks about just how the Fire Nation had a takeover spirit. If you remember from Avatar, the Avatar and the Fire Lord, towards the end, Toph Bei Fong states, it's like these people were born bad. But that being said, during the first 15, 20 pages, you made me, and this is the first time ever in my life, you made me open up to look deeper into this world, the Fire Nation world, because I felt sorry for Sojin. Like we know that Roku went off to the other earthbending, the other communities to learn the bending disciplines. But I felt so bad for that kid, right? So there was a scene. There's a part of you. I'm sorry. There's a part in your book. And I'm trying not to be, spoiler. But there's a part where his father says the airbending nomad, the one Roku's instructor, the one that was taking him away, gives a look towards Sojin's father. It's more like a. And then Sojin's father goes, "Yeah, we have to, in so many words, keep him on a leash. Yeah, it's okay." So that makes me think: did Sojin's father, was he already planning on taking over the world as Sojin was a child, or that's just their attitude? Because they're always about striking with force. And if you think about the Fire Nation Academy, what goes on there, everything is discipline, discipline, discipline. But for that man, for the airbending nun to give him a face expression of I'm not going to say hate, but of doubt, or this man is a dictator. That's the face expression I got from the words of your book. Was he already planning on taking over, or that might be a spoiler, or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know his exact plans. Like, I never feel like I know everything about my characters. I don't know his exact plans, but in my mind, Firelord Taiso, who's Sozin's father, is a very practical leader, right? Like, he knows how he can use things, how he can use people, right? For example, kind of like in the same way that we see Ozai, right? Using, Taiso uses Sozin's sister, Princess Seisan, as a tool to like push Sozin, right? In the same way. And so I think the same kind of thing. He sees the friendship that exists between Roku and Sozin, and his brain goes to, how can we use this, right? How can we use this to help Fire Nation, to improve our cause, to position ourselves better? I don't know if he's necessarily like planning world domination at that point, but I think he's always thinking about, how can I use this, or how can we use this as leverage? And also kind of keeping in mind something that I thought about a lot too would be, Roku would obviously be thinking a lot about the previous Fire Avatar, would have been Avatar Zeto, right? Who was the Grand Advisor to the Fire Lord at the time. That's established canon. And so like, I think everybody would be thinking about that. And I think nobody more than the Fire Lord, maybe beyond Roku, would be thinking about getting that avatar on your side and perhaps bending them to your will or to your advantage for whatever purposes.
I just want to kind of interject real quick. And so I know I want to ask, so a lot of people here in the audience, I'm just reading the chat and keeping an eye out. It looks like a lot of folks have read the book. Would you be open to talking more about story elements of the book and basically spoiling the book?
Maybe we can issue some kind of like spoiler alert
Yeah.
Put it
in
on
the chat, and then
Spoiler warning. Yeah.
indicate when the spoiler section is over.
Okay, sounds good. I know, Rico, it's your turn to ask a question, and then afterwards I have a spoiler-based question to ask. Kind of sourced from the chat, but also goes in line with one of the ones I had, so.
Okay. First of all, when you met, because reading forward, I noticed, because you did mention Filipino culture references in there, and as I was reading, I mean, I like when you mentioned like Eskrima firebending, I'm like, what the heck? Now now I'm trying to imagine what that would be like to see a Filipino martial art utilize firebending in there. But yeah, back to the question, but it is sort of related to the culture. Because similar to how the Sun Warriors are based on many ancient Mesoamerican cultures, the people of Lambac Island seem to be based on a lot of culture found in the Philippines. Now, is this exclusive to that one island, or are there others out there?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine others out there.
Mhm.
One of the things Brian and Mike told me when I first met with them was that when you look at the map of the world, it's symbolic, right? You're not seeing every island, you're not seeing every city, right? Because you just can't show all of that on a single map. In the same way, if we look at our world map, you don't see like everything, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, and the Philippines itself, right, is over 7,000 islands. And
Oh
so
yeah.
if you have this nation of islands, like there's gonna be all these
Right.
islands out there, and there's gonna be some that are a little bit more remote that aren't visited as often, right?
And a lot of different dialects too. So
Right. Yeah.
and
And so I just imagine like, yeah, there are these other cultures that have kind of sprung up in different places and different islands. At the point of Roku's life, there's not quite like this extensive amount of travel between nations as there is later, right?
Mhm.
We don't see these giant steamships
Right.
trawling across the waters like we do in the original series yet, right? Or we don't
Mhm.
see airships yet. And so you have some people traveling around, but you don't have a whole lot. And so, yeah, so I imagine that there are a lot of cultures out there, and even cultures that have kind of purposely withdrawn from others, cultures
Yeah.
that are hiding themselves from others intentionally, like Lombok Island for
Mhm.
different reasons, right? But yeah, I imagine there's more out there, and
Right.
that was a fun thing for me, was like throwing in those little Filipino Easter eggs, if you will.
Well, yeah, because I noticed like okay, a little bit of spoiler alert because when Roku saw those waterbenders dancing, immediately I thought of things like the traditional Filipino folk dances like the binasuhan or the tinigling and all that. I'm like
Hmm.
more specifically binasuhan because a lot of waterbending and which is obviously a different form reference to Tai Chi in general, but you see a lot of I imagine doing a lot of flowing and moving around like so
Yeah,
and
and you just think of like
like
this world, right, from Juan to Korra, it's like
yeah.
thousands of years. So there has to be so much history that we don't know yet, right? Or other bending styles that have been lost or undiscovered at this point still.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Something I actually relate to myself, but yeah. Um, Go ahead, moment.
All right. So I this is kind of one of the questions that I had, and then there's another question, another spoiler-based question I'll ask after that. But this one it kind of pertains to grief, and so we learn more about Gyatso and his loss affecting his bending. We learned about Roku and how he's kind of parallels in terms of loss. He was a twin, and how that's kind of affected him. When you, how, like, what, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of incorporating like grief as a big theme behind the characters, the major characters of this book? And like, what gave you the idea to make Gyatso have a sibling or Roku a twin and things like that?
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the big questions that I was thinking a lot about was like how does Roku not see what Sozin eventually becomes, right? Like decades later. How does he not see that? And like he does eventually and then catches him, but then kind of like lets him off still. Um, and so I was thinking about like essentially what if he had this relationship that he lost, and Sozin kind of filled that void for him, right? And and so that was kind of the idea of like him of Roku having a twin that he lost at some point. Was it created this giant void for him in his life and his relationship that Sozin was able to step into, and Sozin was able to kind of become this brother for him, right? And so the relationship becomes a little bit more entangled, a little bit more complex, I think, in that way, because there's also all this psychological stuff of twins losing their other twin, right? And and then when Roku leaves to go off to start his training at the Southern Air Temple, it's almost like a new hole opens up for him, right? Because he's losing Sozin now, and so that creates the space for somebody else to step into it, which to me was Gyatso, and so then I also needed to bring him and Gyatso together, and I wanted them to kind of similarly have this grief that they bonded over, that gives him something with Gyatso that he actually doesn't have with Sozin. Like Sozin was friends with Roku's brother, but he wasn't his sibling. And so I wanted both Roku and Gyatso to have this lost sibling that they eventually come to bond over, right, and connect with. And this is the kind of thing that really, when they open up about it, allows them to find that connection, but also allows them to kind of start teaching each other in a way, right? And so then, yeah, so I don't know, there's like a lot of layers to this. And then I also think about how Sozin would kind of be aware of this and kind of thinking that he could manipulate Roku in this way, but also kind of have this fear of what Roku might do or who he might become if he's not there, whispering into Roku's ear, so to say.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you for answering that. I know ATLA Bender, you want to go ahead and ask another one of your questions.
Well, in your book, um, I was excited to see the installation of Gyatso. We got to know him a little more. We got to know Roku a little more. We got to know Sojin a little more and his family. So I was really impressed. Not that I had any idea what was going to happen in the book, but I was impressed about the characters that were that eventually come together and work in a unit, and they have to. Like you have Gyatso on behind a crowd. You have Roku's on stage making an attempt. And this is a spoiler, by the way. Roku's on stage in an attempt to give a speech in the town that had like a lot of damage. And Gyatso's in the back of the crowd, making
Cracking.
noises and laughing. Like I laugh so loud, my wife she comes out the door like, "What's so funny?" I was like, "No, you never mind. You have to read the book because I didn't want to spoil it." But with that being said, with all these different characters in your book, how did you go about creating the names of these characters? And once you came down to the wire of it, did you have to send it off for submission? But you said they gave you the full freedom, or did you just went ahead and went with your heart while you was creating these characters and the characters' names?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, um, I came up with them somehow, either pulling from history or in the Legends core book for the role playing game, it talks about like the different naming conventions in the different nations. Excuse me. And one of the things it talks about is in the Fire Nation, you have a lot of times like one syllable from like a parent's name is passed on to the child, right? And so thinking about Taiso, Sozin, right? So you get that like so repeated. Um, and so yeah, so some of it was kind of following those naming conventions. Some of it was like I said, like research and or into history and kind of pulling names from those kinds of places. Or just yeah, sometimes I play around with things myself. So for example, I mentioned uh, Avatar Zalir as one of like the previous fire avatars. Um, and Zalir is an anagram of Rizal, who's the national hero of the Philippines.
Yep,
Uh,
Jose Rizal.
yeah,
Hmm.
and so it's something like that, where it's like I take this name, move the letters around, and get a cool sounding name that I can use that does sound like Fire Nation still. Yeah, and usually it's like I throw it out there, I just put it in the draft, I just go with it, and then when the Avatar team is reviewing it, uh, if they don't say anything, then it's cool, the name sticks. If
Right.
they comment on it, then I might need to like change the name and try something else. Sometimes it's because there's another character that has that name already, or maybe another character in an upcoming project that has it, so they want me to change it for that reason. Um, yeah, but for the most part, I think it's just kind of just testing it out, just throwing it out there and seeing what sticks. For me, I like the names to have some kind of meaning, but I also like it to like feel like the character, which is something I can't really explain well beyond just the idea of like the sound of the word that is their name fits what the character feels like to me.
All right, cool.
All right. Rico, what's your next question?
All right. Okay. When talking to Roku, Ulo brings up the fact that ancient humanity lived on the backs of the lion turtles, Now, how did you envision the lion turtles to be known by the general public in Roku's era?
Hmm. I would say most of the general public doesn't know them, doesn't know about it. I would say, I would think like there's, of course, like writing referenced in Roku's era, and you would certainly have like writing going back a few hundred years. But then beyond that, I would imagine most of the knowledge is passed down, via oral storytelling. And so, we don't know a whole lot about Ulo's actual past, but I imagined him having been in a position where he did receive these oral stories that were passed down from other elders, and he has kind of twisted them to his own devices for his own purposes. But he kind of has some, every now and then, there's a kernel of truth that slips through in some of his stories, right?
Hmm. Like
The
embellished,
same,
or
yeah, it's embellished or twisted, or maybe there is something that is accurate. But I think about that a lot too, of kind of like, yeah, we have again this huge world with thousands of years of history. You have all these places that are maybe connected or disconnected to different extents. So I think it's hard to determine like what does the general public know, because I don't think there is like a general knowledge base that everyone's operating from. Like people in different regions and different time periods have different access to knowledge. And Ulo too, it's noted that he travels around a lot, right? And so I think he's also somebody who goes around and probably collects that wisdom, that knowledge. I mean, again, uses it for his own devices, but is very
Mhm.
much somebody who seeks out that kind of knowledge.
All right.
Okay. I have some more of the pre-submitted questions that I wanted to ask you. Kind of going into knowledge, we know that Sozin goes over to Washington's library, which we learn about in the original Avatar: The Last Airbender series. And so we wanted to learn a little bit more about Asho, I think is how to pronounce his name, ASH with O. And so Sozin was kind of disappointed that his scroll didn't mention Sacred Cave. You know, that I have here, was that the only mistruth in the scroll? Can we expand a little bit more on Asho's character? Like, would love to learn a little bit more about Asho as a plot point.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we know too much about Asho actually as a person. The inspiration for that kind of character was, we have a lot of like travelogues and stuff like that from people claiming to have traveled, like in our world, I mean, right? There's a lot of these kind of like older pieces of writing. Like this was like a very, famous type of writing for a very popular type of writing for a long time, right? These stories of these oftentimes, well, usually men who went off on these adventures to these foreign lands, right? Whether it was like to the Arctic or to some jungle, in the Amazon or something like that, and then came back and told their stories, right? And sold a lot of books or had it published serially in magazines and stuff like that, or newspapers, and kind of gained a lot of notoriety that way. And even like a lot of knowledge of the Philippines comes from the Spanish friars who
Yeah.
first visited the island and recorded what they saw. And yeah, and I think that's an interesting way. It's like if we're thinking about how do we get knowledge from other parts of the world at this time, like to me that made sense to kind of have this kind of tool in there. But then it also makes sense to me that you don't know what's right and what's not right, what's accurate and what's an embellishment. Because yeah, same to go back to like the Spanish priests writing about the Philippines, like some of it's like a gross misinterpretation, right? They didn't understand the nuances of the culture or the language. There's like, oh, look at these savages, right? Um, and so yeah, and then sometimes people who wrote these kind of travelogues, like in our world, did just embellish things for the sake of making it sound more adventurous or more exciting or more intriguing or making themselves sound more heroic. So to me, Asha was very much that kind of figure who it's like, did it even exist? Who knows? Did it even go to these places? Who knows? Again, kind of like with Ulo, maybe he heard some stories and just kind of collected them and kind of told his own tales. Where you, again, once you do go to the island with Roku, or once you're on the island with Malaya, right, you do see some of the stuff from that is like, there's some truth to there, right? There are these kernels of truth to some of the stuff that he talks about. But also there's some stuff that's like wildly inaccurate or exaggerated. Um, like could a firebender using the sacred cave move the sun? I don't think so. But this is one of these things he's like, embellishing, exaggerating to kind of make it seem more exciting for his readers, right? And I think, I just think like I'm always interested in our concepts of what we know about the world and what we know about the past, and also I'm interested in subverting that a lot of times, right? And kind of suggesting that we don't know, or this is a perspective, or this perspective had a certain bias or slant to it, in the same way that happens in our world. And so Asho to me was kind of like a way to do that, of putting this idea in Sozen's mind, but it was maybe a little misdirected or misrepresented.
Somebody in the chat says, so nobody moved the sun. Tear.
Damn it, I don't
Is there
know.
nobody what?
Nobody moved the sun.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm just
knows?
giving you my impressions, and I don't ever want to give the impression, even with my own books, that I know everything about the world or everything about the characters, right? I think as an author, I'm just giving you a glimpse of it in the same way that I'm just getting a glimpse of it when I write the story.
Yes. All right. You mentioned another character there, Malaya. So my next question is going to be about her. But I also don't want to take that chance away from ATLA Earthbender. So ATLA Earthbender.
You can go ahead and ask.
All right.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in.
Love and spirit, baby. Love and spirit.
So, Malaya. A lot of people, like, kind of like this, we talked about killing as a topic, with Sozen, and so it's Sozen and Malaya potentially. Did when Gyatso discovered Malaya, did he realize that she was killed for firebending? Just the death of Malaya. Can you talk a little bit more about Malaya as a character and just how you developed her story and her end?
Yeah. So I wanted, again, like thinking about those like Spanish missionaries presenting the culture of the Philippines, I knew I wanted a character of the village, who kind of showed you what it's like in the village as well. And so from her perspective, you are seeing kind of what's going on in the island. I kind of withhold it for almost 100 pages, I think. I think you don't get her perspective until like 80 pages in or something like that. Because I wanted you to see what's happening on the island. I wanted you to see the manipulation that Ulo is kind of doing on the people and what he's withholding from the people. In the same way that, like, I didn't want you to just be like, all right, here's what Ulo is doing, and he's a bad guy, and everybody on the island is a bad guy, right? I wanted to kind of show how someone like him gains power, maintains power within that society. But then I also wanted somebody who would question that, right? And who would kind of be at her own crossroads of, here's this thing that is happening that she discovers that's kind of been kept from her for a while. And unlike Amihan, Malaya's like, I don't want to do that, or I'm not willing to do that. And you see the conflict that kind of creates for her and her situation. And then she ends up meeting up with or finding Gyatso, and then by Gyatso eventually Roku, and helping him with Roku. And so, I don't know how much detail to go into with all of that. But
however much you want.
Yes. Yeah, so she was also functioning as like this guide to the island for Gyatso, right? And somebody who, it's like, without her, Gyatso wouldn't have been able to find Roku, or wouldn't have been able to help Roku in that situation. And I think, like, in terms of her end, like, it, again, like I said earlier, like, what is the guiding thing for me, when Tall Earthbender asked the question, is not like, how are fans going to react to this? So she didn't meet the end she met because I survive off of your tears or whatever. What guides me is like, what is happening in this moment, right? And kind of where she was at the story, where Sozen was at the story. That was the ending that I think made the most logical sense for me. As much as I didn't want it to happen, right? As much as I wanted Malaya to survive, and I wanted you to go on adventures with Roku and Gyatso later on. To me, it just made undeniable sense that that's kind of what needed to happen to her in that moment. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll leave it there, but you can feel free to ask follow-up questions as well.
Wow. Yeah, I think that I'll stop there because otherwise I'll just keep asking and asking and asking. So, and I know we're coming up onto time a little bit, but we still have time. But yeah, I wanted to pass it to ATLA, Brenda, or Rico. You guys want to keep a question coming? I have more, so
One
I don't
final
capitalize.
question.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, one
Yes,
final
I have
question.
one final question.
yeah.
But
Right. So
Tal, you get-
Randy, I'm muted.
No, you're good.
No.
Oh, I
yeah,
thought you said I was muted.
No.
Randy, last spoiler question, by the way. It stood out to me a lot, and I know it may not mean anything to anybody else. But in your book, Sister Disha tells Roku, you are a spirit of no nation, and a spirit, and your spirit's the sole purpose is to maintain balance across the worlds. You said worlds as in plural. To me, that says there are other Avatar worlds out there. Is that what you meant?
So
Was that
literally, I
like
just
an Easter egg to come one day? You said worlds. You got me thinking. You said worlds.
yeah, I mean, so you're asking like, is this a multiverse kind of situation? And I don't know. I'm like literally in the function of that sentence grammatically, it's referring to the human and the spirit world, those two worlds.
Mm.
Is there something larger than that? I don't know. That's above my pay grade.
Okay, I thought because I thought that maybe you threw that in there. Like I'm gonna see who picks up on it. And somebody asked about the Black Arrow. This is a multiverse. I'm a multiverse avatar.
So,
Here's the blue lining and the black interior color. Oh yeah, worlds. I'm like, wow. So there's more avatar worlds. Yeah. But okay, I understand. Above your pay grade, as you stated. Thank you.
oh man.
My son made the arrow, by the way. He's pointing out. Don't forget, I made the arrow. He just walked by. But anyway,
Oh man. All right. Well, I have I have one question to ask. When you wrote Reckoning of Roku, did you have plan for the sequel already in mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the simple answer is no. Uh, because I knew all the books function as like duologies, right? Because the Kyoshi and the Yang Chen, it's like 2 books each, and I knew that's kind of that was their plan for Roku as well. I didn't know if I was going to write the sequel or not. I had not signed a contract for a second book at that point. And so it was just kind of like up in the air still, and so I knew there would be a second book, but I didn't want to, in case it weren't me, I didn't want to write the story into a corner where it's like you have to go in this direction with the second one. Like I tried to leave enough open at the end, and I tried to like seed enough hints of things that like where the places where the story could go and conflicts that remained unresolved. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to like it to feel like a to be continued kind of situation, right? Like I wanted you to have resolution here, so that if I did pass it off to another writer, they would kind of be able to have the flexibility to kind of take the story where they want it to go. With that said, am writing the sequel, working on the sequel now, and so a lot of the stuff that I had in my mind as like ideas of where I wanted to take the story, I'm going to get to play out. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we are looking forward to The Awakening when it drops. And
yes,
yeah, because Reckoning is just off the chart, man, off the chain.
it
It's
is.
amazing.
It's a very good read. I'm thoroughly enjoying. I love your descriptions when you're describing what's happening in the scene. I have a pretty good imagination, so I'm seeing all this unfold. It's like watching an episode almost or a movie. So I'm really enjoying, especially if I'm loud, am I laughing, or if I'm saying "oh" or giving out verbal emotions. That's when you know it's a good read. So thank you for pulling us in as your audience. This is a very good material, and I can't wait to read the next one.
So
Thank you. Yeah.
it looks like I'm looking at the time. It's about 350. So I'm going to ask looks like there's a lot of interest to learn a little bit more about Jungib. So can you hint at like some of the identities or origins of Jungib? Like in the spirit and like whether if they're gone for good. What are your thoughts?
No. No, I cannot. I cannot elaborate. Not even necessarily for anything specific beyond just like what's it's important for me to keep the spirit world mysterious, right? Um, I don't I don't want the I don't know. I don't want midichlorians, basically.
Wow.
I don't want things like
Wow.
too logically spelled out, right? And so something like Jungib, I want it to remain mysterious. I want it to remain in your imagination. And I've heard like different people's theories about it, and I like love that. And I want that to be fostered without without like spelling out things too much, because I think that that takes away some of the magic when you're kind of like you all have these cells and they they measure the force.
The chat
Makes
right now is
sense.
kind of reeling. They're like,
Yeah.
no.
In a way, it does kind of make sense because we would not be having discussions like this at all.
Yeah.
You know, keep it open-minded and all that.
That being said, I'm going to ask one more question here. It's another question that was submitted by one of the pre-submitted questions, but it's another question of mine too, is Tamin and Roku, and so can you tell us more about Tamin and if she's becoming like a more, like who has a large influence? We know throughout the series, Roku and Tamin, they get married, and then their descendant basically is married to Sozin. It's not Sozin, Ozai. Right? Right. And so, like even for me, when I was reading about Roku and Tamin, their love was very similar to Sokka and Yue in the sense that Sokka meets the girl, but she's betrothed to somebody else. In this case, Tamin is betrothed technically to Sozin. Can you like I'm a love story gal. Can you like elaborate on just the element of love within this book?
Yeah, and not technically betrothed to Sozin. It's just kind of like her dad would like her to be betrothed to Sozin. But yeah, I think it's like a different approach. I think like it's always like you want to present things a little bit differently, right? And I think like with with the original series, you had the slow burn, right? You had the slow burn uh between Aang and Katara. In Korra, you had the messy love quadrangles or whatever they were.
That was like a Korean dramas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and then, in the novels, I think, FCE brought it in and brought romance in different ways. And so, yeah, because I kind of had this outline of, yeah, he was gone for like 12 years and they came back and suddenly got married, it creates this kind of gap of like, well, what kind of happened in between there that I think is fun to explore. And in this one, it's kind of like, yeah, they kind of have this meeting where they kind of connect and kind of have that moment where they're like really talking and spending a lot of time together and growing close to each other. But also I wanted it to be this kind of relationship where it's like a long distance relationship essentially, right? Like they don't formalize it or anything like that, but they're both kind of feeling it. They're both feeling it. But they also kind of both know that their life is taking them in different directions at that time. And so, a big part of Roku's growth is kind of thinking about letting things go in a way, right? Like letting that go. And I think, yeah, it's very much kind of like, oh, instead of, proposing his love to her at that time and moment and getting her to like stay or go with him or something, he's kind of like letting it go. And she also very much sees that she needs to go off on a separate path at that time. And so I think, yeah, but then also I wanted very much like for her communication with him, for what they talk about and what she says to him, particularly about being the avatar and like, that the whole idea of spirit of all nations as opposed to no nation, something that stays with him, I think, in the same way that sometimes somebody will tell us something that we're not quite ready to hear yet, but then later something happens and it clicks and it makes sense. And for me, that's kind of what she does. She says that thing about being an avatar of all nations, or spirit of all nations, early on in the story. But it's not until later that he really clicks and understands what that means, and for him, that's like a big turning point in accepting or understanding what it means to be the avatar. And so for me, I always want every character that I include should serve some kind of purpose to the story, right? Like if you removed them, the story would not be the story. And so it's like if you just pulled out Tom Min, like he wouldn't have had that realization, I think, in that moment, and he wouldn't be on the path to accepting his avatar status or identity in the same way that he is at the end of this story.
My last question for you, and this is to kind of close things out. Do you have any questions for us as fans of your book and of the Avatar universe? Like, do you have any burning questions that you're like, as a fan, I need you to tell me X, Y, Z, especially because you're a fan yourself. So I just wanted to open up the question to you.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, my question I'm always interested in hearing is just like people like, who's your favorite character and why? Like from anywhere in the Avatar verse.
Easy.
No, yours
Wait,
already.
Momo.
You can start, Atala.
Oh, you know mine? Go ahead, Momo. You answer.
Oh, you want me to answer first?
Yeah, ladies first.
Oh, sure. Momo.
Momo.
Motivated. It's my gamer tag from like the beginning years. I think just he's so whimsical. Like Momo's just so whimsical, just a part of the story, and I would just love to see like the world observed and all the events observed through Momo's eyes. Like he's just there, but like he's there all the time. And
yeah, are you talking about we need like a Momo's Lost Days episode?
Yes, exactly.
That Bossing Say episode, right? I mean, we did have the Bossing Say story.
You get a mini glimpse.
Yeah.
So that's probably my favorite character, Momo. A tall earthbender. Who's your favorite?
Well, I think the name speaks for itself. I mean, who's tall and who's an earthbender?
Kyoshi.
In the Avatar universe, Randy.
Kyoshi.
Avatar Kyoshi. I mean, I love Toph too, but I love Avatar Kyoshi because she's really tall and I'm 6'6". So I've had this name for over 15 years now, Rico.
Oh, my turn. Okay, for me it would be Aang, because I've been cosplaying as Aang for the longest time at conventions, and what really tripped me out is when I met Gordon Cormier, who played Aang in the live action. He literally loved my costume, and he was like, "Wow, you really are a hardcore fan." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm just trying." He's like, "Nope, you're a hardcore fan." Right? And an honorable mention to Iroh, because Iroh's a very open-minded cat, and to see his arc go from how he was suffering, coming from Fire Nation royalty, and he's the complete opposite of what they are, and dealing with the loss of Lieutenant and then rising above all that, and to be the loving tea drinker that he is. He's one amazing character that I love looking at. Love his story arc.
And Randy, last question to close it out. It's gonna be a two-part question. One, I'm throwing your question back at you. Who is your favorite character in the Avatar universe? And then also, I got a request. A lot of people want to talk about the comet error and what the actual line was supposed to be. So I think that'll be a good way to kind of close out this conversation. But yes, who's your favorite character and comet error? You can choose whichever one you want to answer first.
Yeah. So comet error is just like, it was just like a math mistake. Like I think in my head I was thinking 66 BG, and then I was thinking, all right, I don't know, like counting up to 100, I was like 44, right? And as opposed to like going the opposite direction, 44 years. And so it was just like a counting error, and then it's just like a typo that made it through all the passes, right? Every book has typos that make it through, no matter how many people are looking through it. So it just happened to be one of those mistakes. As for favorite character, I mean, like Rico, I would say I would go with Iroh for the same reason. Like, I'm always really interested in characters that are raised a certain way, uh, and then manage to like break out of that, right? Or resist that or change despite that. So yeah, I mean, you see that with Zuko too. Obviously,
Yep.
I think he just has such an interesting past.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, like to go from the Dragon of the West, from the General, from the Crown Prince, to kind of being this chill dude who likes tea and is trying to counsel his nephew to walk a different path. Like I just think that's an amazing transformation, and I'm always interested in characters that can resist the dominating or toxic ideologies of their time or of their upbringings.
Yeah, because he's like the black sheep of that of the family in that era. You know what I mean? Just,
Right.
he literally is the black sheep in that family, and for the common good too, though.
Yeah. My one gripe with him is that he kind of wrote off Azula too quickly.
Yeah,
Like he's there for maybe this little sexism. I don't know. He like is there for Zuko, and then Azula, he's just like she's just crazy, and he
he's
just kind of
crazy. He's got to go down.
lets it go.
He's another story fueled by grief also. So another great kind of, tie-in, just how grief impacts a lot of the people in the Avatar universe. But that being said, it is 4:00 and we do want to, 4:00 Pacific time, 7:00 Eastern time. But so we do want to be respectful of your time, Randy. Thank you so, and I could go on
Thank
with
you.
the so's.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
was
you,
great.
and looking
Yeah,
forward to
everyone.
your
Thanks to
awakening.
everybody who watched and submitted questions. I love it all. Yeah.
Yeah. and
Looking
And make
forward
sure
to
you come
the
to Spaghetti
awakening of
Factory dinner
Roku,
post
and yeah.
Comic Con.
Wait, what was that? You guys, okay, one more, one at a time.
I heard San
I'm
Diego
sorry.
Comic Con. What is this?
And well, in July we do like a post fan Spaghetti Factory dinner. We've been doing it over 15, 17 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Be nice to have you. Rico will pay for your meal.
Oh, really? Gonna be paying with my Canadian currency? Okay.
Thanks again, Randy. Thank you so much for joining
Stay
us.
flaming hot, man.
Thank you. We do the Fire Nation salute. Thank you.
All right.
And thank you, Avatar Discord.
Yes.
Thank you, Avatar
everybody
Discord,
who's
for
listening.
having us too.
Yes, thanks for letting us host it here. You guys posed really great questions, and we hope to bring you some more cool events like this in the future. Randy, we're probably going to ping you when the next Awakening of Roku comes back, so you'll probably hear from us again. But until then, thank you guys. Thank you, Randy. And we're closing it out. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
And then Avatar music.
All right.
Oh, Lord.
Avatar Origins. Thanks, everybody.